water from a stone.
I think there was a little something for everybody. You know, it was like,
Yes,
you know what it was?
that is true.
It was like a Vegas buffet. It's never as good as the actual pictures of the food.
I don't really like picture food.
Really?
Yeah, you see the pictures, and it's
You
not.
love
But
to
then
eat
you go, you got the eggs Benedict, you got the pancakes, you got the waffles. I'm really stretching this.
Yeah.
And then, but you get to the buffet, it's never as good.
No, but do you like to go to restaurants where they have pictures of the food?
Oh,
like
that's
outside?
not good.
I don't like to go to those. No.
That's
I'm
usually a
ashamed against
flag.
that.
That's usually like a warning
flag.
sign. I mean, except if it's McDonald's.
Right. The fast food's different. Jesse, final thoughts?
Final thoughts.
You're going to read this whole thing this weekend?
I mean, this is a lot of heavy lifting.
That's
here.
only half of it.
It's going to get worse. I feel like they're going to find even more dirty nuggets in this thing.
Dirty
and then
nuggets.
by the time that's
you think
over,
they're already found?
it's going to be on to the weekend. Look, we've gotten all this after 3 hours.
Yeah.
3 hours.
bad.
They're going to have a whole night, people reading this stuff, a bunch of staffers. There's going to be much more incriminating stuff. But we'll be on to some other story tomorrow.
On to another story. That is true. Well, set your DVRs. Never miss an episode of The Five. Special report is up next. More breaking news on the DOJ IG report with Bret Baier.
Yep.
This is a Fox News Alert. I'm Bret Baier in Washington. The Justice Department Inspector General says then FBI Director James Comey was insubordinate during the Hillary Clinton email investigation. The report also reveals a text message in which one investigator tells an FBI lawyer that they will stop Donald Trump from being elected. But the report does not directly attribute political motives to those actions. Just moments ago, the current director of the FBI promised that people will be held accountable, but insisted nothing in the report impugns the integrity of the Bureau as a whole. We have extensive coverage tonight, including reaction from two chairmen, Trey Gowdy and Bob Goodlatte. But we begin with Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge at the Justice Department tonight. A lot to digest. Good evening, Catherine.
Well, thank you, Bret. This 500-page report was 17 months in the making. It addresses allegations of political bias, and it found that Attorney General Loretta Lynch showed bad judgment, and FBI Director James Comey was insubordinate.
No charges are appropriate in this case.
When FBI Director James Comey gave his July 2016 public statement, the Inspector General found Comey went outside the chain of command when he intentionally kept his boss, Attorney General Loretta Lynch, and her deputy, Sally Yates, in the dark. Quote, "We found that it was extraordinary and insubordinate for Comey to do so," the report said, and we found none of his reasons to be a persuasive basis for deviating from well-established department policies. In a tweet, Comey responded, "I respect the DOJ IG office, which is why I urge them to do this review. The conclusions are reasonable, even though I disagree with some. People of good faith can see an unprecedented situation differently." On text messages between FBI agent Peter Strzok and FBI lawyer Lisa Page, Inspector General Michael E. Horowitz found no documentary or testimonial evidence of political bias that impacted investigative decisions prior to Comey's July 2016 event. In a recent Fox interview, Comey said politics played no role.
I was deeply disappointed in them, but I never saw any bias, any reflection of any kind of animus towards anybody, including me.
But as part of an ongoing forensic review, a text message recovered last month suggests Strzok may have acted for political reasons much later than initially believed. In August 2016, Page wrote, "Trump's not ever going to become president, right? Right?" Strzok replied, "No, he won't. We'll stop it." In late September, investigators found tens of thousands of Clinton emails on a laptop computer shared by Clinton aide Huma Abedin and her husband Anthony Weiner as part of a separate investigation. The Inspector General said Strzok dragged his feet, and no action was taken until 2 weeks before the election, when Comey reopened the email case. Quote, "Under these circumstances, we did not have confidence that Strzok's decision to prioritize the Russia investigation over the Weiner laptop was free from bias." But Strzok's attorneys dispute that, saying the facts contained in the report lead to the conclusion the delays were caused by miscommunications. On the June 2016 Arizona tarmac meeting between Attorney General Loretta Lynch and Bill Clinton, the report concluded Lynch showed bad judgment when she took the meeting and failed to recognize the appearance problem created by former President Clinton's visit, and to take action to cut the visit short was an error in judgment. On whether the Clinton emails containing classified information were hacked, the Inspector General uncovered an FBI report that was conducted after the election. It concluded, quote, "Classified information was compromised by by unauthorized individuals, to include foreign governments or intelligence services via cyber intrusion from accounts linked to Clinton's server. And within the last hour, we heard from FBI Director Christopher Wray, who said he accepts the findings of the Inspector General. He acknowledged that mistakes were made, and he said there would be consequences.
The report does identify errors of judgment, violations of or even disregard for policy, and decisions that, at the very least, with the benefit of hindsight, were not the best choices. We've already started taking the necessary steps to address those issues. First, we're going to hold employees accountable.
Also, Director Wray emphasized that this was a single investigation and a handful of employees were involved. He also emphasized that this does not in any way, in his opinion, impugn the overall integrity of the FBI and its workforce, Bret.
Catherine, great job reporting. Thank you. Let's get reaction now from the chairman of two major House committees looking into all this. Trey Gowdy is chairman of the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee, and Bob Goodlatte chairs the House Judiciary Committee. Gentlemen, thanks for being here. Chairman Gowdy, first to you, just a broad overview. What strikes you about this report? What's hit you when you look at the 568 pages?
Just what a dark day it is for the FBI and the DOJ, two institutions our country desperately needs. We desperately have to be able to have confidence in them. And this level of bias and animus, not only did he want to stop the Trump campaign, he wanted to stop the Trump presidency. This is an FBI. Peter Strzok, the FBI agent who was on Hillary Clinton's investigation and arguably the lead Russia investigator, not only wanted to stop his campaign, but once he won, got on the Mueller probe because he wanted to impeach him. That is a level of animus and bias that everyone should reject. And Chris Wray, I'm sorry, you're wrong. Chris, there are consequences. The consequences are that your fellow citizens question whether or not they can have confidence in the world's premier law enforcement agency, and that's coming from somebody who's defended them a lot throughout his career. This was a bitterly disappointing report.
Chairman Goodlatte.
Well, first of all, this report shows that there was special treatment given to Hillary Clinton in the investigation of her case. There is not standard procedures followed in investigating her, and there was special treatment given. There's no doubt that this was not proper process, and the report shows time and time again how Director Comey and others made mistakes, errors in judgment, or deliberate. People can draw their own conclusions, but it was improperly handled. And as Trey said, you then put that up against how the investigation has been handled into the so-called Trump-Russia collusion, and you have a contrast that is shocking in terms of how they handled one presidential campaign compared to another. It's got to be investigated further. Changes have got to be made. I will compliment Director Wray on some of the personnel changes that have been made. I will compliment him on saying that there are sobering lessons learned from this. We need to see changes made so in 2020 we don't see another presidential campaign handled like this.
So when you hear Republicans and people who've been looking into this and say this 568 pages there's just not a lot there, or that Horowitz kind of left something on the table, how do you respond to that?
This is a very thorough investigation. He takes minutia and examines each piece carefully, draws his conclusions, and I commend him. I think it's a well-done report. And I never expected he would find every single thing, as some critics have said, but he did find all kinds of irregularities here. When you couple that with the struck page texts, including this new one that has come out recently, where part of it was redacted, by the way. We only recently learned the whole sentence about how he was going to stop Donald Trump from being president of the United States. That is improper for the FBI. And quite frankly, this is the world's premier law enforcement organization, and it's besmirching the reputation of tens of thousands of brave men and women who keep us safe, prevent terrorist attacks, fight crime every single day. And a handful of people in the hierarchy of the organization have caused serious damage.
All right, let's put up the August 8th, 2016. That is the one where Page says Trump's never going to be president. Right, and Strzok takes text back. That part was redacted in the documents you received. No, he's not. We'll stop it. Here's another part that we believe in November 22nd, 2016, FBI Attorney 1, is it making you rethink your commitment to the Trump administration? We think that's Lisa Page. Attorney 2, hell no, viva la resistance. And we believe that's Peter Strzok. Let me play this soundbite, Congressman Gowdy, from Jim Comey in his interview here in Special Report. I asked about these Strzok Page texts and if he knew now what he knew then, what he would do.
I'd have removed both of them from any contact with significant investigations.
So shouldn't their work...
Including those involving anybody connected to President Trump, but beyond that, because it's just such poor judgment.
Shouldn't their work product then be questioned?
Sure, it's a reasonable question to ask.
So
they were bad-mouthing everybody, including the candidate Trump.
So Peter Strzok interviews Hillary Clinton, deals with the bleach bit and the server and Cheryl Mills, all of that, interviews Michael Flynn, and is integral in this whole case.
But he's one of many other people involved in all the things you just ticked off. When I saw the text, I was deeply disappointed in them, but I never saw any bias.
Any bias?
Well, he's not reading the same text I'm reading. I mean, Peter Strzok said that the vote should be 100 million to 0. He can't think of a single solitary American that should vote for Donald Trump to be president. He said he'll stop it as a candidate. He talked about impeachment once he won. Actually, Director Comey unwittingly just proved the point of the question you asked him on follow-up. Would you have kept him on the investigation had you known what you know now? And he said no. Okay, why not? Because bias is that insidious, that is that pervasive. It colors your ability to do what we need the FBI to do, which is to be fair and fact-centric. So, of course, you're going to fire him the day you learn. In my head, I go back, when did you start working on the case? That's when you should have been fired. So whatever he did on either of these investigations, Bret, it has to be viewed through the prism that he can't think of a single solitary person that should vote for this man to be president.
So Strzok's attorney says this is taken out of context. It didn't affect his decisions. Some people say, what happens in the context of those texts? Did they know something about the Russia information, and that's what they're referring to? Do you think that this changes at all in context, or in a vacuum it's just damning?
It changes a lot going forward, because I don't know how my fellow citizens are going to be able to have confidence. I mean, Russia did something to our country in 2016. It was serious. It deserved to be investigated. It deserved to be investigated by a fair FBI agent who was not talking about impeaching the person that he was investigating. His lawyer is just wrong. That bias did impact something. He was so hyper-focused on Trump that he ignored the Weiner-Abedin emails, and it caused Jim Comey to have to send a letter a month later than he should have sent it. The other point, Bret, is this. Why is it our job to prove that Strzok's bias impacted his decision-making? I got a better idea. Strzok, you come before Congress, you come before the American public and prove to us that your manifest animus towards Donald Trump did not affect your decisions.
Let me ask one more question on this. Hold on one second, Mr.
What Trey just said, because Trey is exactly right. We have been requesting that he be produced as a witness for quite some time now, and if that agreement is not reached, we are very shortly going to issue a subpoena for him to appear.
Speaking of that, there's also documents that you want that you still haven't received. I mean, this process has been going on.
We have set up a better process. We're making progress. We actually have a room down at the Department of Justice where they are producing tens of thousands of documents, and our investigators are going through those, identifying the ones that we want produced. They are producing them. So we're making progress in that regard. But we also have other documents they have not produced, and that we're making progress on that. We have meetings coming up shortly on how to get those additional documents requested produced. This is the American people right to know. The Congress is their representatives. These documents have got to be produced. There is no reason not to produce them.
Chairman Gowdy, the last time you talked about the FBI inner workings, it was about this allegation of Spygate and all of that. You said at the time that you thought that the president and others would think that the FBI was doing what they were supposed to be doing. In context of this, and you're animated about what you're learning out of this IG report, does it change your perspective of how this has all progressed, even when it comes to the Russia investigation?
Bret, I'm animated because Russia tried to undermine the fundamentals of our democracy in 2016. And I think anyone who heard what any law enforcement agency heard in the summer of 2016, every one of my fellow citizens would say, you go find out whether that's true or not. You go find out whether or not a foreign, hostile country is going to mess with our election. What my fellow citizens also expect is for the agent that does the follow-up to be free of taint and bias, like 99% of the FBI agents are. It just so happened the one picked to follow up and lead the Russia investigation has manifest animus and can't think of a single person to vote for Donald Trump. So those two are inextricably intertwined. Most of my fellow citizens would say, yeah, I want to know what Russia was doing to us in 2016, but I also want the person that's finding out, that's investigating it, to be free of bias and free of taint.
And they would say Mueller fired that guy.
He did fire him, and God only knows what damage he was done before Mueller fired him. This is what's so pervasive about bias, Bret. It doesn't matter what Mueller comes up with. Some people are going to believe because Strzok's level of animus was so high that you can't remove the taint. That's why bias is so destructive in a justice system.
Chairman Goodlatte, this is what I hear on email, on Twitter, on Facebook. They hear us reporting on these 568 pages. They've been waiting for months and months and months. And they hear what is coming out of it. Who is going to pay for something that was done wrong in their mind? And investigation after investigation, it seems like it comes to a head and then nothing happens.
Absolutely. Hundreds of classified emails were handled improperly in violation of the law, and no one has been held accountable in that regard. Now we see that that whole process of that investigation was handled with extreme bias and a whole host of questionable actions, and people need to be held accountable. Some of those people are no longer employed at the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Department of Justice. That's a good thing. But we're going to continue to follow through until we're sure that changes have been made so that these things can't occur in the future, and we don't have a 2020 that looks anything at all like 2016 in terms of this kind of mishandling of investigations of the highest level of importance when you're talking about the two candidates for President of the United States. So Trey and I are going to have a joint hearing next Tuesday where we'll have the Inspector General. We'll be able to go into this 560-page report and ask manifold questions. And then the following week, we have already requested the Deputy Attorney General of the United States, Mr. Rosenstein, and the FBI Director, Christopher Wray, to come forward and talk to us and answer our questions based upon that report.
All right, other quick nuggets here. In this IG report, it says definitively that Hillary Clinton's emails were hacked by foreign actors of some kind.
Let me tell you why that's so important, because when they're listening...
Despite all the denials, I mean, we went through all of these stages that it wasn't happening.
Well, but we got a little window into that when Jim Comey, one of Jim Comey's original memo drafts had that language in there, and it was edited out. Let me tell you why it's important. There are two reasons they cite for not prosecuting Hillary Clinton. Number one, that she didn't have specific general intent, and number two, she didn't expose it to foreign actors. We now know one of those reasons is bogus. And had they done a good job of interviewing her, had they not made up their mind 6 weeks before they went to interview her, perhaps they could have found evidence of an intent to commit a crime. But they didn't look for it. They made up their mind before they ever interviewed her. But that is really important that Horowitz and others, some of our colleagues, had unlocked the fact that those emails were exposed to foreign actors.
Most of the rank and file FBI agents thought if I did this, I'd be prosecuted. That's in the IG report.
Absolutely. And we found other precedents where people were prosecuted for similar actions, contrary to what the FBI director concluded.
The Weiner investigation case was slow-walked.
No question, because Peter Strzok was so obsessed with Donald Trump in the fall of 2016 that he sat on emails, and by the time Comey got to him and sent the letter, we were on the eve of an election. But in September, when they learned about this, he did nothing because he was hyper-focused on Trump.
And if I were a Democrat or an independent or any American, I'd be concerned about how Director Comey handled that aspect of it, which is also criticized by the Inspector General. Why would you handle the way you released that information days before
Let me play that. This is SOP 1 from Jim Comey. Weeks went by without any action.
I do know that New York and FBI headquarters became aware that there may be some connection between Weiner's laptop and the Clinton investigation weeks before it was brought to me for decision. I don't know whether they could have moved faster and why the delay.
So was it the threat that the New York agents were going to leak, that it existed, really what drove you to the not conceal part?
I don't know why there was, if there was slow activity, why it was slow for those first couple of weeks.
There's at least one agent who says that he knows that they wouldn't be prosecuted anyway.
Well, a couple of points on what Director Comey said. He uses the word index. He didn't properly index the fact that Huma Abedin was married to Anthony Weiner. He may be the only person in the Western Hemisphere that did not know they were married. That's one of his excuses. It took a prosecutor or an agent from the Southern District of New York calling to Washington, specifically saying, what in the hell are you doing and what is taking so long? That's what finally got him to move. McCabe wasn't moving and Strzok wasn't moving.
Some of Strzok and Page's text messages may still be missing. IG says that.
We keep looking for them. He's actually done a good job. He's the one who found the first big batch of missing text messages and made those available back to the department, which then made them available to us. But yes, I think we've actually benefited in a multitude of ways from this investigation. It's filled in pieces of the puzzle, but it's also resulted in more information coming to us just in the last few days and weeks.
All right, wrap
Funny
this
thing
up.
about that.
Winner and loser in this IG report in your mind?
Well, unfortunately, I think that Trey is right, that the Federal Bureau of Investigation as a whole is a loser, and I hope that Christopher Wray is taking his sobering lesson to heart, that he can do great things to restore the public's trust in this very important organization, which we all should trust, and I think 99% of the time we should, absolutely.
The winner is Michael Horowitz because he proves that you can be fair, fact-centric, and conduct a serious investigation. The loser is every one of my fellow citizens who wants an FBI and a Department of Justice that they can believe in. All of us have lost when we have a department and a bureau that we cannot have confidence in.
Chairman Gowdy, Chairman Goodlatte, we appreciate your time, and we'll continue to follow up.
Thanks, Bret.
Thank you. Up next, reaction on the IG report from the White House. Plus, we go live to Beijing, China, where the Secretary of State is trying to sell the president's plan for North Korea. Stay with us. Now to reaction of that IG report from the White House, where President Trump is taking the day off essentially from public events, celebrating his 72nd birthday. All that possibly being overshadowed by a legal challenge coming out of New York to the president's charitable foundation. Correspondent Kevin Cork reports for us tonight.
Certainly, there are a lot of things in this report that not only worry those of us in the administration, but should worry a lot of Americans.
Even as the White House today offered its full-throated support for the Inspector General's report, it was a lawsuit from New York State that really got the White House's attention.
The current acting New York AG has stated that battling the White House is the most important job she's ever done. That sounds outrageously biased and certainly problematic.
In it, New York State Attorney General Barbara Underwood accused the Trump Foundation of illegal conduct, including coordinating with the Trump presidential campaign in 2016. The suit aims to dissolve the Trump Foundation, obtain restitution of nearly $3 million, and includes referral letters to both the IRS and FEC. The suit alleges the Trump Foundation illegally provided extensive support to his 2016 presidential campaign, with Underwood calling the charity little more than a checkbook for payments from Mr. Trump or his businesses to nonprofits, regardless of their purpose or legality. Investigators point to a January 2016 email from former Trump campaign manager Corey Lewandowski asking for money for veterans charities in Iowa just before the caucuses there. Indeed, the AG's office says at least 5 $100,000 grants were made there right before votes were cast in the Hawkeye state. But the president pushed back on Twitter, calling New York Democrats sleazy, saying they're suing a foundation that took in $18.8 million and gave out to charity more money than it took in, $19.6 $1.2 million. I won't settle this case. The Trump Foundation added succinctly, this is politics at its very worst. The suit is just the latest in a steady stream of legal actions aimed at the president or his associates, from former National Security Advisor Mike Flynn and former Trump campaign manager Paul Manafort to the suit brought by former adult film performer Stormy Daniels and persistent accusations that the president has violated the Constitution's emoluments clause.
Bret, 3 of the president's children, Don Jr., Eric, and Ivanka Trump, were also all named in that lawsuit by the New York AG because each has served as a board member of the Trump Foundation. Bret?
Kevin Cork live on the North Lawn. Kevin, thank you. House Speaker Paul Ryan says it is inhumane to separate children from their parents when they attempt to cross into the U.S. illegally. Ryan made the statement today when asked if he's comfortable with the current zero-tolerance policy.
No, I'm not. This is because of a court ruling. And so this, I do think, ought to be addressed. We believe it should be addressed in immigration legislation. We don't want kids to be separated from their parents.
The House is expected to consider new immigration legislation next week. Stocks were mixed today. The Dow lost 26. The S&P 500 gained 6. The Nasdaq jumped 65. If you live in Minnesota, you can wear your favorite political T-shirt or hat or button the next time you vote. That's what the U.S. Supreme Court is saying tonight after a ruling on the balance between keeping polling places free of politics and a voter's First Amendment rights. My colleague and anchor of Fox News at Night, Shannon Bream, looks at what the decision really means.
Things may look different at polling places across Minnesota as voters cast their ballots for the primary elections in August, thanks to a 7-2 ruling from the U.S. Supreme Court today. At issue was a state law banning political badges, buttons, or, quote, other insignia at or about the polling place. Today, the justices held that restriction violates the First Amendment.
This is a court that strongly respects the First Amendment, and they are going to say that although states sometimes can attempt to limit speech, even political speech, the Supreme Court is going to hold them to the constitutional maximum as to what a state can do.
On Election Day in November of 2010, a number of Minnesota voters ran into trouble when they wore "Please ID Me" buttons and Tea Party Patriot or "Don't Tread on Me" T-shirts. Writing for the majority, Chief Justice John Roberts characterized the law as ill-defined and applied in a haphazard manner. Quote, "The state must be able to articulate some sensible basis for distinguishing what may come in from what must stay out." Minnesota officials argued they have a compelling interest in maintaining peace, order, and decorum in the polling place, protecting voters from confusion and undue influence or intimidation, and preserving the integrity of the election process. In her dissent, joined by Justice Baier, Justice Sotomayor said she would have sent the case back to the Minnesota Supreme Court to get a definitive interpretation of what the word political means in the context of the apparel ban, quote, which likely would obviate the hypothetical line-drawing problems that form the basis of the court's decision today.
I think the majority quite reasonably said, well, no, we're here to enforce the First Amendment. We're not going to give the state another bite at the apple. There's no need to do that. If the state wants a do-over, just enact a narrower law.
Well, the Chief Justice was clear the majority does believe states do have the right to regulate these issues around polling places, pointing to California and Texas as examples of getting it right, but ultimately found Minnesota's law lacked sufficient clarity. Bret?
Shannon, thank you. See you at 11. When we come back, the president's top diplomat defines exactly when the U.S. will loosen sanctions on North Korea. President Trump's top diplomat says the U.S. will not ease sanctions against North Korea until it denuclearizes, let's just say it gets rid of its nukes. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo was in Beijing to discuss the North Korea summit with Chinese leaders. Correspondent Rich Edson is in Beijing right now.
Secretary of State Mike Pompeo's week-long Asia trip focused on disarming North Korea's nuclear arsenal concludes here with a commitment from China to maintain pressure on North Korea.
China has reaffirmed its commitment to honoring the UN Security Council resolutions. The sanctions and the economic relief that North Korea will receive will only happen after the full denuclearization, the complete denuclearization of North Korea.
The Secretary of State also met with China's foreign minister and other senior officials at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. China wants a reduced U.S. military presence in the region and approves of President Trump's decision to suspend military exercises with South Korea. Earlier in the day, Pompeo was in Seoul, meeting with South Korean President Moon Jae-in and the foreign ministers from South Korea and Japan. He defended the president's decision to suspend the exercises, saying if North Korea fails to negotiate in good faith, the U.S. will simply restore those drills. Pompeo says those discussions will also involve an intense accounting of the size and scope of Kim Jong-un's nuclear program.
We have a reasonable understanding. We will work with the North Koreans to come to have a fuller understanding of that so that we can begin to execute together the commitments that President Trump and Chairman Kim made.
In Pyongyang, North Korean leaders are also commemorating the Singapore summit, releasing a video showing Chairman Kim's experience. And in one scene, the President of the United States saluting a general from North Korea.
This trip for Secretary Pompeo also featured persistent questions as to what exactly North Korea agreed to in Singapore. One journalist asked why phrasing the administration's been using for weeks, like verifiable and irreversible, was omitted from the final document President Trump and Kim Jong-un signed. Secretary Pompeo says it did include complete denuclearization, which covers those terms, and said that question was insulting, ridiculous, and frankly, ludicrous. Bret?
Rich Edson, live in Beijing, traveling with the Secretary. Rich, thanks. Please join me Sunday night for a look at how another summit 3 decades ago changed the world. 3 days in Moscow covers President Ronald Reagan's efforts to reach a nuclear agreement with Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev. It's based on my new book, 3 Days in Moscow. Here's a preview.
When I came in 1982, Reagan was still in full-throated denunciation of the Soviet Union. He was still very much playing the Cold Warrior.
What I'm describing now is a plan and a hope for the long term. The march of freedom and democracy, which will leave Marxism, Leninism on the ash heap of history.
Few, even among his allies, shared his belief that the Cold War was winnable.
There was a huge argument within the administration. People in the Defense Department and the CIA both thought the Soviet Union was there. That was the time. We're here, they're there, that's life. Get along.
The American public seemed to agree. Nearly 3/4 favored a nuclear freeze by the United States and Soviet Union.
I urge you to beware the temptation of pride, the temptation of blithely declaring yourselves above it all.
That sparked Reagan's most forceful criticism ever of the Soviet Union.
To ignore the facts of history and the aggressive impulses of an evil empire, to simply call the arms race a giant misunderstanding, and thereby remove yourself from the struggle between right and wrong and good and evil.
I was at the speech where he talked about the evil empire and the focus of evil in the modern world. It was stunning. Even by Reagan standards, that was pretty blunt and pretty raw.
3 Days in Moscow debuts Sunday night, 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Up next, the panel reacts to the Inspector General report on the Clinton email investigation. We'll take a look.
This report did not find any evidence of political bias or improper considerations actually impacting the investigation under review. The report does identify errors of judgment, violations of or even disregard for policy, and decisions that, at the very least, with the benefit of hindsight, were not the best choices. We're going to adhere to the appropriate disciplinary process, and once that process is complete, we won't hesitate to hold people accountable for their actions.
The FBI Director Chris Wray reacting to the Inspector General's report from the DOJ. 568 pages, and in it, Jim Comey, the former FBI Director, really takes it on the chin. There are some other developments in there, as we talked about with Chairman Goodlatte and Gowdy. Let's bring in our panel. Charles Hurt, opinion editor for the Washington Times. Charles Lane, opinion writer for the Washington Post. And it's not Charles, but Matthew Continetti, editor-in-chief of the Washington Free Beacon. Okay, Charlie, what do you take from this report? Reaction to it, where we're going?
Well, I think the most interesting thing is the top line, where you have people saying that there's no evidence of political bias in the whole process, which it strains credulity to think about that, because okay, maybe there's no smoking gun where James Comey said blatantly, I want to rig this thing so that Hillary Clinton wins and Donald Trump loses, but all throughout the whole report also shows rampant political bias all up and down the system, whether it's Peter Strzok and his star-crossed lover, or if it's Loretta Lynch and her decision to punt on the entire thing after meeting on the tarmac with Bill Clinton and hand the whole thing to James Comey, or all the other characters that clearly had a unmistakable bias here. And it's especially when you stop and consider the final decision that they made when James Comey comes out and gives this withering indictment of Hillary Clinton over the email thing, and then says, but we're not going to indict her.
Speaking of Loretta Lynch, I talked to her and asked her specifically about the Clinton email case back in February 2016. Who's the ultimate decider at the DOJ?
It depends on how the matter comes together. Essentially, it's going to be reviewed by those career independent agents and lawyers that I mentioned, and they'll make a recommendation as to what they've discovered and what they recommend.
But the up or down, yes or no, we're going forward or not, is that you?
It just really is going to depend upon what they find.
It wasn't her.
Yeah, I think she comes off not too hot in this report, because really her inability to sort of resolve one way or the other, am I either going to recuse because I met with Bill Clinton on the tarmac, or am I going to stay in and take the heat? She never came to rest on that point, which created the opening for Jim Comey to come along and do his thing, which of course this AG declares completely improper and
pretty scathing about that
total
decision.
Violation of procedure. And incidentally, it's my take on this report is it shows there's a little bit in it for everyone, because a lot of Hillary's people are looking at this. I know a lot of Trump people are looking at this as vindication. A lot of Hillary people are taking vindication from this, claiming that it shows clearly that Jim Comey intervened in this thing improperly, and that hurt Hillary's chances for the election. Again, I think that it is just standard operating procedure. You don't comment on an ongoing investigation if you're the flatfoot doing the investigation, and Comey thought it was his responsibility to somehow usurp that, and that's, by the way, not my word, but this IG's word, usurp. He did it without discussing it with his superiors and so on. That's pretty heavy stuff.
Matthew, the revelation of this other text between Lisa Page and Peter Strzok, the second part of it that comes out just a couple of weeks ago, no, he won't, referring to Trump about being president, we'll stop it. Strzok responds to Page. That is done before the decision to slow walk the investigation into Anthony Weiner's, the emails on Anthony Weiner's computer. And the IG says that is the place where the political bias could have infected this entire thing.
And also done right around the time we know that the other investigation, Crossfire Hurricane, was being opened into the Trump campaign. And Strzok was involved in both of them. At 568 pages, this is like the War and Peace of misjudgment. Everyone from Hillary Clinton, who started all of this by having those emails onto her classified server, to the investigators Strzok and Page, including Loretta Lynch, including James Comey, including Andrew McCabe, including, some half dozen FBI officials who have been reassigned or retired since this scandal has developed, all exercised grave misjudgment, and I think all of them put their own self-interest or self-conception, their own sanctimony ahead of what were normal procedures that should have been followed throughout.
We will dive into this more, the Jim Comey response and some other reaction, more with the panel after a quick break.
Ronald Reagan and the fall of the Soviet Empire, inside the tension, negotiation, and the historic trip, in a story that's as relevant now as it ever was. Bret Baier anchors 3 Days in Moscow, a powerful special, Sunday on Fox News Channel.
fellow citizens are going to be able to have confidence. I mean, Russia did something to our country in 2016. It was serious. It deserved to be investigated. It deserved to be investigated by a fair FBI agent who was not talking about impeaching the person that he was investigating.
We also have other documents they have not produced, and that we're making progress on that. We have meetings coming up shortly on how to get those additional documents requested produced. This is the American people right to know. The Congress is their representatives. These documents have got to be produced. There is no reason not to produce them.
It seems never ending. The investigations into the investigations and meetings to talk about documents that you don't have. You heard from Chairman Goodlatte and Chairman Gowdy there. Here is the Senate Minority Leader, Chuck Schumer.
The one thing we do know about what happened in late 2016 is that certain actions taken by the FBI, intentionally or not, helped the Trump campaign and hurt the Clinton campaign. It'll take an awful lot of spin, an awful lot of stretching for Republicans to twist that around and portray the president as some kind of victim.
Okay, back with the panel. Charlie, just 30,000 feet, James Comey comes out as a big loser in this.
Huge loser. And, you know, he's a loser for two reasons. One is he gets chided for, obviously, as Chuck pointed out, usurping his authority, trying to be a judge and jury in this case, in determining not only the investigation, but whether charges should be filed, which was terribly wrong. But the other thing is that he got his knuckles wrapped over the fact that he was using a private Gmail account over which he was doing FBI work.
While he's investigating email...
While he is investigating that exactly. So, but I do think it's important to step back and remember why this is so important. People, you know, email, all of it can be very confusing. Your iPhone, your email, all this kind of. The reason it's important is because Hillary Clinton and Jim Comey both. The reason they were using their Gmail accounts or their private accounts is because they wanted to shield what they were doing or what they were saying from the American people, and that's a real problem. Whether you're running for president or FBI director.
Now the report was given to all of the people involved ahead of time before its release, and James Comey wrote a letter to the New York Times, which is now on there. The report resoundingly demonstrates, he says, that there was no prosecutable case against Mrs. Clinton, as we had concluded, although that probably will not stop some from continuing to claim the opposite is true. This independent assessment will be useful to thoughtful people and an important contribution to the historical record. Second, this report is vital in shedding light for future leaders on the nature and quality of our investigation and the decisions we made. Even in hindsight, I think we chose the course most consistent with institutional values. The course, the IG says, was completely opposite of what the FBI was supposed to be doing.
You know, I'm torn listening to that, because on the one hand, it's a measured and thoughtful response to a report that's highly critical of him. It's admirable that he responds in that tone. On the other hand, he just won't concede that what he was doing during this period was attempting to manage perception of the FBI and of Jim Comey. You know, and he's quite open about that. I didn't want the public to get the wrong idea about this. I didn't want to get the legitimacy of that jeopardized, so I'm going to come forward and do this statement, even though it is totally outside my lane and against policy. And I think the AG, it's I think the most memorable line to me in the whole report. He says Comey's description of his choice as being between two doors labeled speak and one labeled concealed was a false dichotomy. The two doors were actually labeled follow practice and policy and depart from policy and practice. The reason I underline that is if Jim Comey had followed policy and practice, he would be so much better off today.
And he also told me in that interview, I did not see a disparity with how I handled the Clinton case or the Trump case.
Once again, Jim Comey's sense of righteousness, I think, led him to undertake steps that, even though he thought they were right and conscientious, ended up ruining things for everybody else. He's like someone who burns down a house and says afterward, well, we can all learn from this experience, right? So his reputation is tarnished along with a lot of other people's. My takeaway, though, of course, is that this is the first in a trilogy. Because not only do we have this IG report, eventually we're going to have the IG report about the investigation into Trump, and then, of course, the Mueller report as well. So as you say, there's a lot of reading ahead of us.
It is just the beginning, and there are some teases in here about the report yet to come. Panel, thank you very much on a different kind of day. When we come back, a triumphant return to the diamond.